In the hours following the U.S. and Israel's strikes on Iran, the Islamic Republic has retaliated. Iran has launched missile attacks all across the region. The BBC reports at least 3 tankers have been attacked, and in an extremely oil-rich area that is a hub for international trade, the threat of a longer war is sending shockwaves through their economy. As much as a third of all of the world's oil shipments pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which of course is just off Iran's coast. The New York Times is reporting that traffic through the strait dropped as much as 70% as of late last night. So anything that would close the strait or make it harder for ships to cross could send oil skyrocketing. And with oil prices spiking 9% in early trading as Asian markets begin their week, the markets are already warning about the potential consequences. Joining me now, the best of the best, Halima Croft. She's a managing director and global head of commodities strategy and Middle East North Africa research at RBC Capital Markets. We need your help tonight. Let's start with how quickly could the effects of this conflict impact consumers?
Well, if we talk about oil prices and retail gasoline prices, we could feel the effects very quickly if the Straits of Hormuz is not reopened. Now, the Iranians have not physically blocked the straits, but insurance companies, Western shipping companies, do not want to send ships through the Straits of Hormuz when there's a risk of being struck by a drone, by a mine. They're choosing to stay out of the S-curve of the Straits of Hormuz, the very narrow waterways that Iran has ships that they could use to attack vessels.
So these ships, where will they go? They'll just sit in waiting?
They're just basically becoming a parking lot. And the question is, again, if this is an extended military confrontation, President Trump was apparently talking about a 4-week confrontation. If there is no plan to ensure safe navigation through the Straits of Hormuz, that is a path to $4 retail gasoline prices. That is the scenario that would be very problematic for the affordability agenda for the president.
Yeah, I mean, we've got primaries a day from now, and low gas prices is sort of the signature thing that the president hangs on when he talks about the economy.
That had been his signature economic accomplishment. And I think there was a view, because U.S. oil production had been so high, that this would only be a sort of a blip when it came to oil prices. But again, I think the problem is that if we have a closure of a critical waterway, or again, just nobody willing to go through there, there's not an offset in terms of additional supplies. You're essentially making Middle East production stranded assets.
How high could oil go, right? When we saw Russia invade Ukraine, we saw oil spike.
We saw oil spike. Now, well over $100, but we didn't have a physical disruption because the United States decided really not to sanction Russian oil exports. There had been fear of Russian disruptions, but that did not materialize. And the United States released significant quantities of oil from our strategic stockpiles to help bring down the price. Now, one problem now, Stephanie, is that we've essentially drawn down our strategic stockpiles by 40%. We haven't been building it back. So if we do get to, all eyes should be on the straits, if we don't get a reopening of the straits, we have less barrels to be able to bring onto the market to offset a disruption.
Could this lead to another jump in inflation? Like, how might that happen?
Well, again, think about oil. Beyond sort of gasoline prices and transportation prices, think about oil, also natural gas, or significant quantities of liquefied natural gas that go through this strait. That would be very important in terms of anything that uses energy in terms of production, obviously transportation. But beyond that as well, Stephanie, think about the airports that have closed in the region. Dubai Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world, is closed. Airspace across the region is closed. So there are lots of transportation bottlenecks that could emerge the longer this conflict continues.
But are there workarounds, right? Like, I'm trying to compare it to tariffs, for example.
Right,
when the tariffs were announced, the markets have shown that businesses know how to find their way around it. You know, they avoided sort of the worst effects of what the tariffs could have done. Is there a workaround here?
So let's think about a workaround for the Straits of Hormuz. There are some pipelines that could potentially be used to divert some quantities away. But the problem is, are those pipelines secure? So people would focus on potentially the east-west pipeline. That's a way that Saudi Arabia could divert potentially 5 million barrels away from the Straits of Hormuz. But the problem was in 2019, over the summer, you had Iran and the Houthis in Yemen launch drone attacks on that very pipeline. So is the alternative route secure in an active war zone?
Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to get to next. Like, put Strait of Hormuz aside, how much could a regional war create all different choke points that affect global trade?
Well, I think the really interesting question is, again, if we think about the oil market, would we have to release stockpiles from Europe, from the remaining barrels in the United States? Because, again, you could say, well, can't OPEC produce more? That has been the big question, because we had this big OPEC meeting today, and they announced they were going to increase by around 200,000 barrels a day. Yes, they could increase more, but there might be limits to how much more they can do. And it's all a moot point if you can't get your barrels out. So there are some workarounds, but not enough to offset this critical choke point.
Some have speculated that President Trump started dropping bombs abroad to distract from political problems at home. But if that's the case, he may have accidentally made some of those domestic problems worse, such as affordability. Gas prices had been a rare bright spot in the affordability fight, falling for the most part since Trump took office. Right now, however, oil prices are trading above $72, up 8%. This is after analysts had predicted oil prices could jump as much as 10% and climb as high as $100 a barrel, depending on how things shape up. That would translate to higher prices at the pump for consumers like you. It's all because of the Strait of Hormuz on Iran's coast. It's a vital shipping lane that transports, roughly a fifth to a third of the world's oil. Iran warned vessels to avoid it and has struck at least 3 tankers near the strait amid its retaliatory strikes on Gulf states. Data from marine traffic and analyzed by the New York Times showed a 70% drop in commercial ship traffic through the strait late Saturday. Here you can see on the screen the flow of ships through the strait before the first strikes were reported in Tehran, and a significant drop in movement afterward. The United Arab Emirates also ordered its 2 key stock markets closed on Monday and Tuesday as the country reels from Iran's retaliatory strikes. Joining us now to discuss is Ron Insana, veteran financial journalist and publisher of The Message of the Markets on Substack. So, Ron, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
What do you expect to happen to oil and gasoline prices in the next days or weeks?
Well, if you just do the simple math, based on the types of calculations people do when oil prices move, we've gone from a $2.85 national average right now. If we hold above $72 to $75, you're talking about jumping back above $3 to $3.50 a gallon. So again, as you were saying, that one bright spot in the affordability case, it kind of is turned on its head. And it also then feeds into wholesale inflation and consumer inflation readings that the Federal Reserve will be dealing with. So amid expectations that the Fed might cut if inflation were to fall further, that gets dashed, because the one area that was depressing inflation was gasoline prices, and at least for the foreseeable future, until we get some resolution here, oil and gasoline both might remain elevated.
Can you explain a little bit about why it would affect the other things that people buy, the other things that go into the inflation measure?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's a pass-through for a lot of different, products. So if you're thinking about buying anything that's plastic, if you're thinking petrochemical prices go up based on, whatever portion of unused crude oil is put into other goods, then you have the prices go up across the board. And then just by itself, oil and gasoline figure into headline inflation. And so that pushes the overall number up and, again, constrains the Fed, which was hoping that inflation was going to come to its 2% target. This keeps it probably closer to 3%.
It's been interesting to watch the stock markets, because these seismic news events that you would think would cause lurches, not really moving that much. What do you expect tomorrow? Well,
it looks like right now, anyway, Dow futures are down a little more than 500 points. That's a little more than 1%. That is a rather undersized reaction to the start of a war. But I think there are other factors at play as well that, the market's keeping an eye on. Strong earnings so far, decent economic growth, and until recently, at least inflation that appeared to be moving in the right direction. So it's kind of hard to tell at the moment because we don't have all the information we're going to get over the course of this this war, as it were. And so the market can go either way. If it turns out to be something that's resolved rather quickly and the Iranians come back to the table, then stock prices could go up. If this drags on and you see more casualties and you see this spread across the region and become a much wider conflict, then you'd see a much more pronounced reaction in the stock market.
So explain to some of our viewers, I mean, we think of ourselves as an almost energy independent country. We're the world's largest producer of oil. Why is what is happening over there affecting our prices here? So
the oil market's a global market and the prices are set at the margin. So if you take any supply, out of the equation, it tends to push up the price globally, whether it's here or whether it's Brent crude that trades in London. There is an international benchmark price for oil. And particularly, look, if 20% of
the irony here is historic because Donald Trump may have hurt himself with his own decision. Remember, two of his biggest campaign promises that convinced enough Americans to re-elect him. One was no new wars. The message was that his opponent would start conflicts everywhere, while he would keep the country out of war. The sound was that he would lower the cost of living. He blamed Biden and Harris for rising prices and said he would bring them down. But neither of those promises has held up. In fact, in just the last few days, both issues have collided. A new war has begun, and conflicts in the Middle East often push oil prices higher and rattle the stock market. When oil prices rise, everyday costs rise with them. So ironically, starting a war to distract from domestic problems could actually make those problems worse and even create new ones. If you're someone who commutes to work and gas prices go up, even sign at a gas station become a reminder of how much this conflict is costing you. In the United States, that's dollar per gallon. In Canada and other countries, it's price per liter. Either way, the impact is real. And if you have your retirement savings invested in the stock market, even a modest amount, market instability can affect you too. This isn't financial advice, just a recognition that global conflict has economic consequences. So instead of easing concerns about rising costs of domestic instability, this war risks adding to them. What was made to shift attention away from controversy could end up deepening the very economic and political pressures it was supposed to escape.